thank you all for joining. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Steve Schwartz. I run the LSAT blog. I also host the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel and podcast. And tonight I'm joined by Dean Katherine Sims of Baylor Law. Katherine, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, I'm Katherine Sims. I'm the Director of Admissions and Financial Aid at Baylor Law. I'm actually a Baylor Law alum, and I have 8 years of experience in law school admissions. I am a voting member of the committee, so I have a lot of experience looking at applications.
Awesome, great. Well, I'm very interested to hear much more about that over the course of this evening, and I'm sure the audience is as well. And folks, by the way, there is a chat function here in Zoom, so please feel free to ask questions over the course of the evening, and we'll do our best to get to as many of them as possible. And so the way this is going to run, we're going to discuss the LSAT a bit, especially, of course, the digital LSAT transition, recent changes over at LSAC. We'll also, of course, cover law school admissions with Dean Sims' experience at Baylor Law. Then we'll open it up to a general Q&A. And of course, please feel free to ask questions throughout the course of the evening, and we will do our best to get to as many of them as possible. So big changes over at LSAC and digital LSAT transition. I'm curious, Dean Sims, what questions are you getting from applicants these days about that?
Honestly, the biggest one is how to prep and how can I get enough practice in front of a device I might actually be using? Would you have any recommendations on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And so for those who aren't aware, of course, the LSAT has gone digital. It started last year, the transition from paper and pencil to now being administered on a tablet, specifically a Microsoft Surface Go 10-inch tablet. So if you have a tablet, I would certainly recommend using it. If you don't, I would recommend borrowing one from somebody or maybe possibly even buying one. I don't love telling people to buy more expensive electronics, but it is worth it if it helps you even just a little bit. It doesn't have to be the $400 or $500 Microsoft Surface Go. Any tablet is fine. It could be a Samsung, an iPad, even an Amazon Fire, which is only about $150. And it's worth the investment to get familiar.
And with the digital LSAT functions, how can I go back? I mean, is it easy to use when I'm taking the test? Am I able to go back to previous questions, or do different sections close out once I'm done with them?
Yeah, so like the paper and pencil LSAT, you are limited to the section that you're currently working on. You can't go between sections, but within a section, it's actually pretty easy to go forward and back. There's a left arrow and a right arrow. And for anyone who's concerned about the format and wants to familiarize themselves with it, LSAC has actually put out 3 exams in the digital format at familiar.lsac.org. So you can go on there on your computer or a tablet or mobile. I wouldn't recommend mobile. It doesn't work too well there. And desktop is okay, but you're not getting that touch screen interaction. And so I would recommend ideally looking at it on a tablet to see all the features. But there is some cool stuff on there. Specifically, I love the ability to flag questions to come back to later. And the countdown timer also removes all the ambiguity about potential proctor mishaps. And so that's kind of a nice thing too.
And so am I able to go to a different testing center, just like with the GMAT and the GRE, and get my scores right away since it's digital now?
You would think so. I mean, I'm hoping that one day LSAC will allow you to see your score immediately, or at least get a ballpark guesstimated score that they can later modify slightly. But for now, it's still administered only on select dates over the course of the year. But the good news is that it used to only be 4 times a year. And as I'm sure you know, now, of course, it's as many as 9 or 10 times a year. And so you could take it nearly every month now, but it's not every day of the week like those other standardized exams like the GMAT and GRE.
And then I get a lot of questions about how to even start studying for the LSAT. Should I do self-study? Should I do a program? How long? Can you give us some basic tips and advice that you would give to an applicant?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think that the best way to study, of course, will vary from student to student. Some do well in classroom settings. Some do well with a tutor. Some do well just learning out of books. But there are a lot more options than there used to be, because now, of course, there are a lot of online courses that are cheaper with on-demand videos. I offer one of those on my site as well, but there are many other options too. And I think self-study is a given. You can't assume that taking a course or using a tutor is going to be enough. Most of the work is going to happen on your end as the student's end, and it typically requires a lot more students than they initially expect. You can't knock it out in a month or two and reach your fullest potential. I actually recommend 5 or 6 months to reach your fullest potential, which is more than most people typically expect, but it's worth the investment. I mean, the LSAT score, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's the number one factor in the admissions process. And so it's really worth investing the time.
Right. And so should I just, since there's so many times I can take the LSAT, should students go ahead and take an LSAT just to see where they're at and see what happens? Or should they do the prep first until they get to that point?
I wouldn't take an official LSAT administration just to see how you'll do with no studying, because then you get a take on your record that's probably much lower than your ultimate potential. And there is a new retake limit of 3 times in one testing cycle, cycles running from June to May of the following year. And so you're already burning through one and ending up with a relatively lower score on record or a cancellation, neither of which is ideal. And so I would suggest studying first and only taking it when you're ready. But if you want to have the experience of running through a test, you could do one on your own as a cold diagnostic, as a benchmark to measure your later progress. Or a lot of prep companies offer free proctored exams for marketing purposes. And so if you don't mind sitting through the sales pitch, you can get that proctored experience and see what it's like. But I wouldn't place too much stock in those results, because they'll tell you what you already know, which is that you haven't studied yet and there's still a lot to learn.
Yeah, and I definitely echo that, because I mean, we see all the scores, even though we make our decision based upon the highest score achieved, and it's an expensive test. So I definitely agree with the free diagnostic.
Now, I would imagine that like a 150 followed by a 170 is not as good as having a 170 alone, even if you're not averaging them.
Absolutely. And then also, there's a writing portion of the LSAT, and they've changed that a little bit too, where they've separated that from the day of the LSAT. But how would you recommend a student prepares for that? Do you think they should prepare for that at all, or just wing it?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, in the past, I would have said, don't really devote any significant prep to it at all, other than briefly looking at a couple of sample prompts, because of course it's not scored and a lot of law schools don't look at it, although some do. But now that it's typed, I would imagine that you're much more likely to look at it because it's legible. You can read it quite easily, right?
Right. Yeah, and I think too, something that's interesting, LSAC changed things halfway through the cycle, where they weren't sending CAS reports without a writing sample, and then they just started sending it just by itself. And so schools were at that point challenged with figuring out, are we going to still require the writing sample for being complete? So that's something that I recommend students pay attention to, because different schools are doing different things now with the writing sample, since it's separate.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing that it's separate, I think the consequence of it being separate is that a lot of applicants will forget to do it, or just kind of neglect it and put it on the back burner and procrastinate. And then, of course, it never happens. But I think that since schools, of course, they can see whether you did it and they can actually read what you write, then it's only to your benefit to do it. I mean, some schools will require it in the end, but either way, if you have like low English grades in college, or if you're not a native English speaker, this is a chance to show your true writing abilities.
And back to some timeline stuff. If I'm looking to enroll in, or if a student's looking to enroll that's taught here today in fall of 2021, when should they really be planning to take the LSAT?
My answer for this is always take it whenever you're ready, whenever you have the time to devote significant prep in the process. And so if you're busy, if you're working and you're in school, I would typically recommend wait until a period when you're not at least in school. So maybe over a summer break or over a winter break, or whenever you can dial down your other responsibilities a bit. I mean, of course, scores are good for 5 years. And so you can take it and then not apply for a year if that's what works best for your situation. But I would recommend, whenever possible, blocking off the time and reducing your other obligations over the period that you're studying to really get the most out of it.
And then we probably have some people here who are taking the March LSAT. That's going to be the next administration. And so they're kind of getting towards the end of their preparation. What is your best advice for the week of the LSAT, and then also the day before the LSAT? So
the day before, I'll start there. Nothing at all, nothing LSAT related. Rest, take it easy. If it'll be really stressful for you to be resting during that period, then maybe do a question or two or look at an article or a video or two. But really, that's it. No serious studying. This is not an exam you can cram for. You either know it or you don't by that point. As for the week prior, my rule for taking practice tests is maximum 2 tests per week and minimum 2 hours reviewing each test. And so in that final week, maybe you do one Sunday and one Wednesday and do some light review on Thursday, nothing Friday. Then you take it Saturday. If your test is on a Saturday, obviously shift this over if it's on a Monday for your test date. But really keep it light, and then also thinking about why you're taking these exams. What are you hoping to get out of them? If your first exam that week goes really well, maybe you just want to end on a high note and do some light review after that and leave it at that.
Yeah. And what are some common mistakes that you see people do or make whenever they're preparing for the LSAT?
I think the biggest mistake in general is that students will take exam after exam and simply measure their results, be happy or sad, track obsessively with spreadsheets, and then move on to the next thing. I call this the obsessive practice exam narrative. It's the idea that there's some hidden pattern in your mistakes. And if you could unlock it, it would change everything. When in reality, you got to slow down, take fewer exams, and review them in detail. And so, of course, neglecting review is the other big part of this. Students should take typically fewer exams and review them in more depth rather than just looking to burn through all nearly 100 released exams.
Absolutely. Are there any other just little nuggets of wisdom that you typically share that you think are helpful to people who are preparing for the LSAT?
Yeah, I would say definitely use real official LSAT prep tests. There's a lot of books out there using fake exams that contain mistakes or are unrealistic, or they're using really old exams because the licensing fees are lower. So I'd say make sure you're using relatively more recent exams and typically move from older to newer over the course of your prep. And the other thing I would say is build the foundation first. Again, students want to jump into taking timed exams every week or multiple every week, but they haven't even learned the basics. So learn the basics first, then do individual timed sections, then pull it all together with full-length exams. But build it step by step along the way. Don't jump to the finish line.
Absolutely. Well, and I'll throw in too a tip that I always tell people, because on test day, it's not just you and the test in a quiet space. There's a lot of distractions. Might be too cold or too hot. There might be some light that's flickering, or someone's making a lot of noise. And so once you're comfortable with the different test questions, maybe go to a local coffee shop or a noisy place on campus or at work and do some test prep questions there where you get accustomed to just focusing on you and the test. I know that helped me significantly and made test day jitters a little bit less.
Oh yeah, that's a great piece of advice. I recommend the same, because test and day environment, that's not going to be sterile. Oh. There's going to be distractions. I mean, the proctors sometimes are talking on their phones or talking to each other, or the marching band is outside during homecoming. Yes. That's a big thing I hear a lot. Do you get a lot of addenda related to that?
I do, actually, quite a bit. And sometimes you can actually have LSAC send a note in your file about the test day conditions. I think it's important when it comes to the application to give us context, especially if something extreme was happening that day. It's not really beneficial or compelling to just say something, I'm not typically good at tests, and so I wasn't good on the test this day. I mean, if there was something really distracting, like health-wise, you had the flu, or something significant was going on with your family or something like that, it's always good to provide that context. But I still do always recommend being realistic when it comes to your LSAT score. You have the information out there to see where different schools' medians and bottom 25th percentiles are. And so especially if you've only taken one LSAT and you're falling really far below where you need to be, I would still recommend taking another one. Maybe the conditions would be better, but certainly always explain.
Right. So I imagine it's good to explain, but my general inclination on this is that ultimately schools, they want the number, they want the higher score, and ultimately retaking is often the answer.
Often, yeah, it is.
Yeah. I've got a related question for you. With the digital LSAT transition, and LSAC has been changing a lot of things over the past year, there have been a number of rule changes as well about what is permitted, what is not permitted on test day. And I heard from one student recently who he had brought a pen to the test center and not realizing that he was limited to using only the stylus that also contains a pen on the other end. And he got a little bit of a write-up over this, and they said they weren't going to make a big deal out of it, but then they did note it, and he got an email from LSAC, and he's super stressed out about this. So I'm wondering, like, he's writing an addendum about it to say it was unintentional, it was confusion. How might you look at something like this where there's the student, like, they weren't trying to cheat or anything, but they had an item that apparently wasn't permitted?
I mean, we are very understandable about things, especially in a transition year. So I think that an addendum is going to be sufficient there. But also, if a student is in that position and has some schools they're really interested in, we also at Baylor and a lot of schools will offer optional interviews, or you're always welcome to visit and talk to us in person. So if you feel more comfortable backing that up with an in-person or a phone call, that's perfectly fine, because I'm that kind of person. I would be super stressed about something like that as well. But I think most law schools are going to be really understanding about something. To me, that's kind of minor. It's not like they came in there with the answer key or something like that. You know, that's a pin. We understand. Right.
Yeah. Well, that's good. That's good to hear.
Yeah.
How do you look at things like cancellations or retakes if a student has like 3 or 4 takes on the record? Is there like a certain upper limit that you consider to cross the line in terms of being more unreasonable?
That's something that that's a challenge for, that's new for us, because they used to limit it to 3 times in a 2-year period. Then they changed it to no limits, and now there's back to a limit. And I'm glad that there is a limit for a couple of reasons, because I've seen 5 or 6. And I just think that's excessive. I really think that students should try to go in with the one and done mentality, but 3, I think that they should keep in there as kind of a faux limit. And if I see 3 LSATs, that's not that big of a deal, especially if there's that progressive change and they've changed how they were preparing and things like that. I don't have a problem with cancellations at all, because in my mind, that person was realistic with themselves and they knew, okay, that score wasn't the best that I could give. That shows a little bit of dedication. Absentees, are a little bit concerning. So again, I'd probably want to explain that, because things happen, life happens. But I also too, when it comes to deciding whether you're going to take it again, you go back to, okay, I have this information. I know where schools' scores are at. You'll also have your undergraduate GPA. So schools will have their median scores, and obviously the ideal is to be at or above both. But if you fall below 1, you really want to be above the other to put yourself in the best position to obtain admission. And the further you are from either score, it does become increasingly more difficult to obtain admission. So when you're looking at the LSAT score, when it comes back, you also have to look at where where your undergraduate GPA is, and then really make that determination. Now, I've seen a lot of people who will have, solid scores and then go to take it again to try to have an increased scholarship opportunity, because keep in mind, scores are tied to not just admission, but also to the financial aspects and to potential scholarships. But then I've seen people who will get a 5 or 6 point dip down. And that can be sometimes construed as a negative, like, okay, was that first time a fluke? What happened there? So I think it's really important to think long and hard before you take another LSAT.
Right. And I guess the answer is like, take it when you're ready, when you're feeling good. And if something awful happened the day before, then maybe it's not the right opportunity to take it.
Be realistic with yourself and be honest with yourself. It's so important to apply early and get your application in early, but you also don't want to rush it. You want to be able to put your best foot forward and tell yourself, confidently that you've done everything you can. All law schools will have their deadlines. I always say give yourself a faux deadline of December 31st, just like by the end of the year. So my students who are trying to start in fall of 2020, even though our deadline's not until March 16th, I said try to get it in before, the end of 2019. That gives you plenty of time. We open our applications in July. A lot of schools open in September. That gives you plenty of time to get your applications in.
Yeah, so I'd love to ask you a bit more about the timing of the applications, because you said like the faux deadline, end of the year. That meshes with my understanding that it's relatively better to apply earlier if possible. And so what changes for applicants who are taking, let's say, the February LSAT, which was recent, or they take the upcoming March LSAT. If they're taking the February, March LSAT, with the idea of applying this cycle, what disadvantage are they at when it comes to getting in or in terms of scholarships?
I think that the disadvantages are more this year than in previous cycles. And so we're seeing some changes, especially here at Baylor. We are the smallest law school in the state of Texas, and we like to be small, and our past 2 fall classes have gotten a little big. So we, in the past several cycles, have extended our deadlines and accepted later LSATs, and we're no longer doing that. February will be that's the last LSAT that we're taking. We have fewer spots available and less scholarship funding available. And that is likely the case for several other schools, not just Baylor. So you're giving yourself more of an opportunity if you're applying early. Now, a good thing about Baylor, and I saw over on the side that someone did ask about that, we are on the quarter system, and we enroll 3 classes a year. So those students who are taking the March or this upcoming summer LSATs and thinking, oh, well, I'll start in the fall, there's still plenty of time, that's really not going to be the case anymore at Baylor, but they could apply to start in February or May. So for us, for schools like Baylor and other schools that have multiple enrollment periods, there's not as much stress about, okay, I just have this one time to start.
Yeah, that's kind of unique, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. I see there's other schools in our region that have the spring enrollment, but having the 3 different is very different. But I find that helps, especially people who are interested in Baylor, that helps them ease their mind a little bit about taking a later LSAT. But I do think that fall 2020, they're going to have less options. They're not going to be able to pick and choose. They might not get into the schools they really want to get into. And that's just kind of the name of the game, that I'm seeing right now.
Right. So those who are looking to take the LSAT relatively soon might be better off waiting and applying in the fall at the beginning of the cycle.
And, yes, absolutely. And a lot of schools too, I think, are going to have their hard deadlines, so March 16th is ours. That is a hard deadline. And I think that other schools will. So there's not even allowing for the time to apply for fall and then, see what happens, so unfortunately, that's just kind of how things are right now. It's definitely a different climate than my last several years in law school admissions.
Sure. Why do you think that is? Why do you think the climate's changed?
We've seen, so I joined law school admissions about 2012, and that's when the applications were down. Not as many people were going to law school. I think that people have started to see that the legal market, it's not booming, but it's stabilized a little bit. In the past couple of years, we've seen the number of applications tick back up, but also specifically for us, and I know other schools in Texas, we've seen an increase in the number of applicants kind of in our sweet spot ranges. And so, so there's that. And I don't know if students are just applying to fewer law schools, because I've also seen that more and more people are putting down deposits, and then so we do 2 deposits per fall class. So it used to be that people put down the first deposit and then we'd lose a bunch of people. They might put down multiple deposits. We've seen a significant decrease in multiple deposits. I think that students are coming in, at least from what I've seen, with a clearer idea of where they want to go. It's expensive to apply to law school, so they're not kind of casting a wider net. So yeah, and so then I guess schools are responding because we don't want to overflow the market with too many lawyers again. So we're still trying to keep, controlled class sizes. And so I think a lot of schools, especially in the state of Texas, got a little bit bigger than they wanted to be the last few years.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. I imagine that like capacity issues and class sizes and such.
Well, we want to make sure students have access to resources and to faculty. And, we're most comfortable under 400 total enrollment. Right. And I think a lot of law schools want to be a little bit smaller and kind of enjoyed, it wasn't exciting when we had less applications, but once they got here and we were able to really invest more in our students, we started to realize how much more beneficial that is for legal education.
Right, of course. Now, we had a question in the chat about the numbers, LSAT GPA being above the medians, of course, is a benefit to getting in. But what happens if someone just doesn't have the numbers that can cut it? What other parts of the application could they look to strengthen to their chances? Yeah,
we use a holistic review process. I don't stop the numbers. beyond LSAT and GPA, I love to see strong writing skills, commitment to service, and leadership. The personal statement can truly make or break an application, regardless of what your numbers are. So spend a significant amount of time on that. Make sure it's well written, clearly lets us know who you are. I always recommend having 2 categories of individuals read it. You know, someone who really loves you, they can make sure you're truly showing who you are and why you're doing this, and bragging on yourself enough, you know, not too overconfident. But then also have a pre-law advisor or a trusted faculty member read it for the mechanics to make sure it flows and it's not filled with mistakes. And then, you know, in the resume, use this as an educational tool. Don't just stick to the one-page business resume. We want to make sure we have a clear picture of who you are, your background, the skills that you have, the amount of time you dedicated to different activities and work projects. And again, with each thing that you submit, have it educate us on something new. Give us new material. Don't be repetitive, because we are looking for people with unique experiences and backgrounds. We don't want the same different cookie cutter people in every single seat. That would be boring. So everything is truly 100% important. I mean that. Letters of recommendation, I do read them. When it comes to the only thing I don't spend a ton of time on is the writing sample, but I look over it, and what I'm looking for there is to make sure that they took it somewhat seriously. You know, they didn't just draw a picture or something like that. Because you want to make sure that, I mean, this is a profession, and so we're looking for people who are ready for that responsibility.
Yeah, so the writing sample, I mentioned a couple of things, like for non-native English speakers in particular, or someone whose English grades were pretty low. Would you say that's correct, that you're looking at those in particular?
Absolutely. And I also, too, I go back to seeing if schools have the opportunity for interviews, because I find that the most beneficial ones actually for us are the waitlist interviews, or people who are kind of on the bubble. That way it allows us to really get to see them and get to know them and kind of dive deep beyond just what you can see on paper. I think that can be so important.
Yeah. Yeah. Now we, of course, it's ideal if someone can visit the campus and get a real feel for it. But if they can't, remember we were talking earlier before we hit record about the Skype interviews.
Yes, we actually travel for interviews. So
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so we travel across the country in the fall doing recruitment, and in the spring we do some recruitment and just meeting with admitted students where they are, because we understand that not everyone can get to Waco, Texas. So we will post a list of where we will be in person, but then yes, at least once a month we offer Skype interviews, and those tended to work really, really well. And I know it seems kind of awkward and whatnot, but we really enjoy it, and I think the students do too. So it's super easy. There's always a way to connect with us. We also, and I think a lot of law schools are looking heavily towards social media as a way to reach out and connect. And I definitely recommend following us on Instagram at Baylor Law Admissions, because we'll post things about the events, the things our students are doing. We actually even have a virtual tour that a couple of our student ambassadors did. So we love our building. We're super proud of it. And so if you can't get to Waco, again, pictures don't do it justice. So you can follow Zoe and Brandon along on kind of what it looks like from a student's perspective. So definitely use those tools that are available to you as well.
Nice. And so those interviews, the Skype or in person, they're available to all applicants, not just those on the cusp?
All applicants can do an interview. You just have to be applying in that cycle.
Right. Okay. What are some common mistakes students might make with Skype interviews, or what things they should be aware of in particular? Any mistakes you see from them?
Well, yeah, I mean, and something that we kind of encountered earlier was that I froze a little bit. So you want to make sure that you're somewhere with a strong connection, test it out, make sure that the volume is working and all of those kinds of things. I've seen a lot of technical issues. And then also make sure that you still look professional. A tank top or, messy hair or something like that. It's really not that big of a deal, but this is a professional environment, and you don't need to wear a full suit, but just look professional, because poise is something we're looking for during these. Come prepared with questions too, just like for a job interview. So make sure that you have 2 or 3, thoughtful questions at the end. And just practice. Practice, because Skype can be kind of awkward, and I understand. I'll always start at the beginning. I'm like, I'm looking down, taking notes. I'll try to look up at you. We'll get through this together. But that's going to be the biggest tip, is just to try it out before you actually get on the call.
That's a great idea. Yeah. And one thing I have a question about, I connect with a lot of students via Skype and Zoom and such, and I find that a lot of them connect from their phones, and there are often more issues with that, or the setting they're in is not always good. Would you recommend that they not be on their phones perhaps, and instead try to use an actual computer?
See, we had an issue.
Yeah, we just had frozen issue. Did you catch what I said?
I didn't. Well, I heard the phone thing. I definitely think that would be unprofessional in this setting.
Better to use a computer.
Interview. Yeah, better to use a computer. Phone would be absolute last resort. And then the other thing, I mean, this might sound kind of silly, but it's something that you and I had to talk about when we were planning this, is time zones. Mm-hmm. Make sure you know exactly what time zone you're supposed to. I've been in interviews and had someone keep calling in like an hour early, and then I have to answer when I'm having an in-person interview at the same time. So it's definitely important to keep time zones in mind.
Well, that's a great point as well. Yeah, navigating time zones is always something going on. Yeah. Let's see what other questions. International students, do their acceptance rates differ? Anything else they should be aware of when applying?
I think the biggest thing that they need to be aware of is that sometimes it takes a lot of time to get transcripts from international institutions and get them to LSAC. They have to undergo a equivalency evaluation to determine their equivalency to an American bachelor's degree. So that can just take a lot of time. So I would just say do that really early so that you're not waiting on your evaluation and your transcripts. Other than that, they don't really, as far as acceptance rates, it doesn't really differ. The LSAT is going to be that much more important for you, though, because that is the only numerical indicator that we have to look for. So that's just kind of an unfortunate truth there. Right,
of course. Yeah. Now, as for other parts of the application, we haven't touched on the character and fitness portion. Yeah. So I'm wondering what you look for there in terms of like more minor violations or disciplinary issues versus more serious ones. How long should it be?
So, yeah, and the reason we ask is because the bar will also do a character and fitness evaluation for you to be licensed. So we're not just trying to be mean and judge you on your past or anything like that. And it's important for you to be open and honest. And if you have a question about disclosing something, just go ahead and disclose it. Now, if you have one academic probation or even a couple or one MIP or something like that, it's really not going to be a huge red flag.
What's an MIP?
Oh, sorry, a minor in possession. I forget it might be different state to state. So it's a minor alcohol violation here in the state of Texas that we've seen quite a bit on, quite frankly, on applications because, people are at football games and things like that, just drinking for the game.
Sure.
But the thing is that you are required to disclose these things and give context. So you'll say, oh, I got this MIP. It's not just, oh, I got the MIP. It's on X date. These were the circumstances. This was the charge. This was the outcome. We don't want to see a pattern of negative behavior. It becomes alarming the more and more disclosures there has to be. Nothing is going to be a 100% nail in the coffin, like no, right off the bat. We will send things to the admissions committee, the faculty members. Academic dishonesty is taken really seriously because the bar will take that seriously. They take candor and openness and honesty very seriously. So it's just important to be fully honest and take responsibility. We want to see that this person has learned from their mistakes. The further you are from these issues, the better too. So say something, academic probation happened your freshman year of college, but now you're a senior and you've had a clean record up till then. Okay, that's great. You learned from your lesson. You didn't continue down that path. So context is going to be very, very, very important, as well as, time from the incident and things of that nature. Now, every bar is going to be different with their character and fitness evaluations, but in the state of Texas, for example, if you have a felony conviction, you can't apply to sit for the bar until 5 years have passed from the date of that conviction. And even then, they're probably going to take a more strenuous stance there, and you might have to go under more scrutiny. So things like that we'd really think long and hard about and make sure that we talk to the bar and kind of get some guidance from them. And I always recommend that if you have something that's that serious, you may want to talk to the bar in your state and see if they'll give you a preliminary decision or what advice that they have too.
Right. And I would also imagine that if someone has a relatively more serious character and fitness issue, that having an interview and being in direct communication with the admissions office would be appropriate to kind of tackle it head on and put a human face on what's going on there.
Absolutely. And then the admissions committee also reserves the right to request an interview too. So if there's someone who, great writer, service, but man, this is kind of a big deal. I might request an interview just so I can get to know them, but then be frank with them and maybe say, okay, maybe not this year. I've had to have that conversation before. It's been too close to the incident. I can tell this impacted you, but let's get a little bit more on your resume, or let's get a little bit more time and space from this incident to have more to show the committee and the bar about your improved character and fitness. Because ultimately, we want you to be able to sit for the bar exam and become licensed.
Right. And also, the law school, especially a smaller school like yours, is really a community, right? Where you really want to actually connect with every single applicant who you're taking, right?
Absolutely. As much as I can, I would love to.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's nice that the Skype interviews make that more possible, and the touring as well. Yeah.
They do.
So we got some questions here in the chat about Baylor specifically. Right. One is about a hybrid JD and online course offerings. Are those things that Baylor offers?
No. Yeah. No? And I don't foresee that ever for our JD program. We are very much a practical, hands-on, experiential law school. We actually have a third-year program that's dedicated completely to trial advocacy and trial prep and walking through the steps of multiple trials in our courtrooms. Lots of one-on-one time and attention with faculty. So it wouldn't work with how we do things, unfortunately. We do have an LLM program in litigation management, and an LLM is a master's of laws that someone would do once they've had a significant number of years of experience. At least for the one that we have, it's in litigation management, and it is hybrid, but not for the JD.
Right. Oh, thanks for sharing that. And so we have a follow-up question about, for an international applicant who already has a law degree, would an LLM be a potential good option for them?
An LLM, not the one at Baylor, but yes, some others would be. Certainly, if you're just wanting to be able to take the bar exam in Texas or New York or whatever state, they do have LLMs in American legal studies or things along those lines. And yes, that would be a great option. Ours is very much just litigation based. It's not meant to prepare you for the bar. So if you wanted to go to Baylor and become licensed, you would have to do the full JD program. Okay. And we do have foreign educated attorneys who come and start all over.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. We have another question here in the chat about timing for applications. If someone applies in the spring or summer when this person supposedly claims LSAT ranges are lower, I'm not sure if that's true or not, but do you have are your scholarship standards the same year round? Or, as we discussed previously, of course, as the cycle goes on, they diminish?
Yeah, so things actually do operate a little differently for each of our terms. Now, each of our classes has their own numerical profiles, but we use our aggregate overall medians when making decisions and building our scholarship decisions. So our current aggregate medians are 160 and a 3.6, but you will see that spring and summer tends to be a little lower, maybe a 157, 156 LSAT, for example. Now, we use the same scholarship criteria. However, there may be a slight increase for spring or summer. So say you're admitted to fall with scholarship and summer with scholarship, your fall offer would be your summer offer would be slightly higher. And as far as, the scholarship, depletion over the life of the cycle, that really only negatively impacts a fall applicant, because we receive so many more fall applications. We this year had a class of 31 start in February. We're looking for 20 in May and maybe 93 in August. So there's a significant difference in the applicant pool too.
Oh, wow. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to negotiating scholarships, how receptive are you to that? And what works essentially? What is successful for applicants when looking to boost their scholarships?
So we went this year to a formal form and formal request process that we've actually closed as of this week. Things we were receptive to are, and the reason we did the form is because we were just receiving a ton of emails essentially saying, I need more money, or Baylor's really expensive. Can I have more money? And so, but they wouldn't do the work to look at cost of attendance, because there's cost of tuition, and that's just the tuition, the charge that you get to be a student. Then there's cost of attendance, so that is books and living expenses and everything you need to be a person for the year of law school. And very rarely, but every once in a while it would happen that we actually ended up coming out as the less expensive option. So people were just asking because they were told to ask and told to negotiate. So it really helps if they sit down and do the work first, fill out the worksheet, really look at, okay, well, these are the schools that I've been admitted to. These are the offers, but here's Baylor. Look at not just their ranking, but also look at employment statistics and bar passage and things like that, because the school actually matters too. So just be a little bit more thoughtful in the ask, and maybe talk a little bit more about, why you really want to come to Baylor. Are you just asking to ask, or are you asking because you genuinely want to be at Baylor? Because I know, and it's important for applicants to know that law schools talk. We know each other. I have best friends at other law schools, and I'll hear things that applicants are saying about Baylor to other law schools, or I will hear about, hey, they took my scholarship increase and we're just using it to increase it at another school, and they're gaming the system. So unfortunately, I'd love to give law school for free to everybody, and it's just not feasible. So be really thoughtful and kind and professional, and remember that this is a faculty audience. I'm not the one making the decisions on this. It is my faculty, and so they want to see that you've really put in the work and the effort to think long and hard about it. But I'm personally receptive to it, and I encourage you, if it's a school that you really want to attend and you've really thought through it. But I also encourage you to look for external scholarship opportunities through bar associations and civic organizations. I encourage students, once they get to law school, to pay attention to those opportunities. I publish a series of opportunities every quarter. So there's other ways to earn funding too. Also do it early. It's February 24th, and we've already closed our negotiations for now. We may open back up in April once we have some deposits in, but it's important to make sure you're having those conversations a little earlier too.
Right. And I love the idea of making a well-reasoned argument for why you need a scholarship increase. So you could say, these are my costs, these are my other offers, this is the expected cost of living, where you really do your homework and make the calculations. I think that would be much more compelling as well than just writing a couple of sentences as like a pity party.
100%. And I think I want applicants to know that we are humans and we understand. And I know how expensive Baylor is, very personally, as someone who went here. And so I think, and I want them to also know that they're not alone. And I think a lot of people are so anxious about the fact that maybe they didn't have loans in undergrad, or maybe they are coming out with a significant amount of loans from undergrad, and this is their first time where they'll just be paying for school on their own. You're not alone. Everybody is totally overwhelmed by this situation. And that's why we also encourage you to pick up the phone and talk to us about smart borrowing. I will sit down and work with you on a plan that doesn't mean taking out the max loan available to you. There's a free company called Access Lex, where they have great tools and planning for graduate students. So I want them to certainly know that we all understand how expensive law school is, and we want to help you. We want to have conversations with you and try to make it less overwhelming so that you can make a real reasoned decision.
Well, that's amazing. I would imagine that a lot of applicants wouldn't have expected that you would actually sit down with them and help them figure it out. So it's nice to know that you can serve as a resource like that.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Now, you also mentioned that you publish these external scholarship resources. Could you share a bit more about what those entail or where applicants could find them? Because that sounds like it could be really valuable for them.
Yeah, a lot of the ones that we get sent to us are for current law students, not for incoming students. And they're through, the American Bar Association, the different sections. So say you're interested in bankruptcy law, and the bankruptcy law section of the American Bar Association will publish or post a scholarship available to students who are interested in eventually practicing bankruptcy law. We see a ton of that. The Texas Bar Association and other state bar associations will also have different, big scholarships, and then different sections will host scholarships. We see a lot of really particular ones. The Eastern District of Texas wants to give $1,000 to someone who grew up in the Eastern District of Texas. So those kinds of things. There's a lot of scholarships out there geared towards underrepresented populations. Definitely a lot of diversity scholarships, military veteran scholarships, so certain things like that. And so where we post it is for our students to see. We published a bulletin for them. So this is all internal for our students. But I think it's really important for the incoming students before they get to the law schools to start with the bar associations and see what opportunities there might be there. And then any local civic organizations. Just do some digging. I know that just go to like scholarships.com and put in law and see what happens. And I've seen an increase in the number of law firms who want to give just, even just $500 or $1,000 to an incoming law student. So, look in your community. Lawyers love to talk. Lawyers love to get to know you. So just try to get know some lawyers in your community. It doesn't matter if they're not your family member, you're a friend or something like that. Just reach out, and don't be afraid to ask advice of people in your community.
Of course. Yeah. I could imagine that, of course, like the best scholarship opportunity is get a high LSAT score. Yeah. And use that as leverage. But aside from that, it's good to know that there are other opportunities available as well. And I could imagine that an entering law student the summer before they enter, they could go research all of these and apply to as many as possible, and then potentially knock at least a couple of $1,000s off of their loans.
Absolutely. And then too, I consistently hear from people who are offering the scholarships that we let our students know about, they're just not receiving a lot of applications because law students are busy. So if you're, again, an enterprising person and actually applying to those things, your chances are much better than you might think.
Yeah, certainly. Well, I'd love to invite you to share a bit more, Dean Sims, about Baylor Law specifically and what it offers.
Okay. Goodness. So again, with the quarter system, things are a little unique. 1 quarter is 9 weeks, 3 quarters is 1 year of law school, and 9 quarters is the total program. As I mentioned, we enroll 3 classes a year, but then we graduate 4 classes a year. So once our students get here, they finish their first year, so 3 quarters consecutively, then it's totally up to them how they complete their program. You can finish in as few as 27 months. It's a little fatiguing, so we don't recommend it unless you have a job lined up. But it's really reasonable to graduate in just a little over 2.5 years. Also, because of the quarter system, we're going to require more classes than a traditional law school. So beyond the first year curriculum that you'll see at all law schools, where it's contracts and torts and civil procedure, we also require trusts and estates. We require an administrative law class. We require business organizations. We require 7 sections of legal writing, which seems excessive, but we've heard from lawyers, we want people to come out knowing how to write almost more than anything else. So they'll take basic research in writing, they will do a brief writing class, they will do transactional drafting and litigation drafting, so a significant amount of legal writing there. Now, with us being a 126 credit program, there's still plenty of time for students to pursue their own unique interests through our 15 professional tracks, which is kind of like a major, or they can just pursue a more general JD and dip their toes into a little bit of everything. As I mentioned, we have our 3rd year trial advocacy program. So instead of the first year being the most difficult year at Baylor, it's actually the 3rd year. We ramp up in intensity because we think our students should be the most challenged, the closest they are to the bar and to actual legal practice. So students will take an in-depth look at procedure and evidence in the classroom and then walk through the steps of multiple trials over the course of 6 months. Now, we do not anticipate that all of our students will graduate and become litigators. The skills are quite transferable. It's all about communication, working under pressure, dealing with difficult people, and things like that. So students really value that program quite a bit, and it's really the bread and butter of our program. I mentioned briefly that we're in Waco, Texas. People know that for Chip and Joanna Gaines and Magnolia, but we're also here, and it's a great location because it's a smaller community, and so it's a really nice place to be a student. It's a little bit more laid back, but we're also an hour and a half from the capital city of Austin, an hour and a half from the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, and then 2.5 to 3 hours from Houston and San Antonio. And Houston in particular is a top 5 legal market, really growing. So we're seeing a lot more students go there. The majority of our students will end up in a major market in the state of Texas, just because we have a great economy, and even if they come from out of state, they love it. But we also have Baylor lawyers in all 50 states. I actually practiced in Georgia after graduating. So we really want to make sure our students are prepared, whether they end up in Texas or elsewhere, and just really ready to go.
Awesome. Well, definitely recommend folks check it out. And it's nice that you're touring all over the place. I'd imagine you tour every major city.
Oh, for sure. I definitely, the fall is going to be the busy travel season for all law schools. Definitely go to the LSAC website. That's the Law School Admission Council website. You'll get an account with them to register for the LSAT, and that's where you're going to apply. But they also host major forums where all ABA accredited law schools are invited. So we'll be in Atlanta, Boston, New York, Chicago, San Francisco, LA, Houston. I mean, there's a ton of those events, but then also, we go to universities, and if I'm in a place that has multiple universities and maybe they're not hosting an event, I'll try to do something, individual with them. So we're everywhere. And we love to meet with people where they are.
Great. Well, I really appreciate your taking the time, Dean Sims. I know that we didn't get to everyone's questions here, but can folks feel free to reach out to your office with follow-ups?
100%. I mean, I think I can type my information in this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Right? Okay, so I'll give you my direct information. And then 254. And this is my direct line. That's not the main line for the law school or anything like that. So definitely get that down.
Awesome. Great. Well, really appreciate it, Dean Sims. And of course, folks who need help with the LSAT can feel free to reach out to me directly, Steve Schwartz, over at the LSAT blog, as well as the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel, podcast, Facebook group, Instagram, all that good stuff. Well, again, Dean Sims, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. We'll do it again sometime.
Please.
All right. Well, have a good night, everyone. And thanks for joining and all your great questions. Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.